All right, I want to make a video real quick of troubleshooting and going over stuff when you get one together and then you go to crank it for the first time and it doesn't do anything. Some things to look for. So this has been a long project, and it's a hodgepodge. It's all integrated and whatever. So got it all together and trying to tidy up everything, finish everything up. I got the heat exchanger mounted. I gotta plumb it and figure out where to put the tank and the pump and all that stuff. And then the for some reason this reservoir they sent doesn't seal to the pump, and so when I had to loosen the pump and try to get it on and into the housing, and then it's got the slide clamps, and anyway, when I bolted it back up and pulled the pump towards their bracket, the reservoir, as you can see maybe, is cocked. So it's twisted, and obviously it can't seal, so it's poured everything out the bottom. So I don't know what the deal is with that. But anyway, I wanted to hear this thing run, because you kind of get to that point in the project where you just kind of got to test everything and make sure that it runs before you really get any farther. So on this one I've done the fuel tank. I put a bigger 535 pump in it. It has the regulator now with the return style, the 4L80 in it, the new engine, and we did change and play around with the wiring some. So we want to make sure that the thing will crank up and run, and then that way we can start finishing putting everything together, with the peace of mind knowing that it runs. Well, I got a battery last night and then hooked it up, and first thing I noticed when I got in the truck and turned the key on, I did not hear the fuel pump. So that right there is a dead giveaway that if you don't hear the fuel pump turn on and prime for those couple seconds and shut off, then it's not going to run. Fuel injection, if it doesn't have the right pressure, about 40 psi, it's not going to crank and run. The other thing I see is, people that do these startup videos, like on TV or, wherever they do a build, and then they just sit there and sit on the starter for, 20, 30, 40 seconds. And I'm just like, if it hasn't cranked up yet, it's probably not going to crank up. So, you need to look and try to figure out what it's missing as to why it's not running. So when I didn't hear the fuel pump turn on, I did turn it over just to watch my other parameters and see if they were all there. I did not see the RPM. It still said stall, so I knew that was going to be an issue. So I came up here to the relay here and the Holly harness for my fuel pump relay there, and I checked it, and it was not happy. So you can probably hear it shaking, but this thing's junk. So I took my power probe over here. Power probe is a very useful tool. You can plug this up to your battery, positive and negative, and then not only can you test to see if you have ground or power, you can also with this lever, pushing it back provides ground signal, and pushing it forward gives positive 12-volt signal. And then you also have a little lead, so a little clip, so you can hook this to a ground if you need to ground it, and then provide power from the probe. So these are very handy for checking electrical issues. So I took the power probe, went to the correct pin on the harness side, put power to it, heard the fuel pump come on, heard the system prime, and knew that this relay was bad. Well, as soon as I saw this, I knew this was bad. So I got another relay, put it in there. So then now we have fuel pump coming on with the key on as it should. And then I went to the crankshaft position sensor harness, which is right there. And again, this is a hodgepodge integrated setup. So we have the Terminator X Max here, and then we still have the stock ECU and stuff in here. So what I'm using this for, giving me signal from the crankshaft to come through to here back to the ECU, so my tach works in the truck. That's why that's there. The other reason is this engine was a 58X, but this truck is a 06, so it was 24X. So I had the machine shop change it to a 24X so that I could have the signal to the ECU to make the tach work in the truck. But the harness was ordered for 58X, so a 58X crank sensor is a 5-volt reference, sensor ground, and then sensor return. A black 24X cam crank position sensor is a 12-volt reference. So I looked at the schematic, and it's daisy chained to all the other 5-volt references, so I wasn't able to just unpin it at the connector here and move it. So that means I had to pull another wire. So I went back to the crankshaft position sensor, and then I have a harness that plugs into the sensor and then has a space of wire and then plugs into the Holly. And then that way I was able to solder the wire into the signal wire to come back to this connection. And then now that I'm doing this, I just unpinned it from the Holly that was given the 5-volt reference and then brought it up to here for my 12-volt reference. Well, for some reason there wasn't a reference there, so I took one of my 12-volt references from when I got rid of the stock harness from the stock computer. I went through and thinned out the harness and pulled out all the wires that we weren't using from here. So these are power wires that went to the mass airflow, the coil packs, and stuff like that. So I just to test, I pulled one of these wires that had 12 volt and keyed position, put the correct end on it, and pinned it to the connector, so I knew it had 12 volts, and then it cranked right up. So it can be frustrating doing, first fire up. You have to make sure everything is ready before you try to crank it. And like I say, you want to make sure your fuel pump comes on. I didn't know what the pressure is yet, so I've got my Allen wrench on here so I can adjust it and turn the pressure up. And then this has a sensor going to the Holly, so I can read it on the dash in there. So once it's running, you want to set your pressure to whatever your tune is, and then you have to take the reference off. So it's skewed because this was, and I still haven't moved this, I know, but you have to have the reference source off because you want it set to whatever's in your tune. So GM is typically 58 psi, and most injectors are rated for 43.5 psi. So it just depends on what's in your tune. So just set this and make it match the ECU. And once you make sure you got fuel pressure, and then watch and make sure you have RPM signal. Again, if you don't have RPM signal, then number one, the fuel pump's not going to run, because as it's turning over, if it's not seeing the crank signal, it's not going to run your fuel pump. So again, you've got 3 wires on the crank position sensor. So just check, make sure that reference voltage is there. If the reference voltage isn't there, the middle one's ground and then the other sensor return, so it takes the whatever wave it is, sine wave or whatever, the signal from that 5 volt as it, once the space in the teeth break the gap, then that's what sends the signal, the sine wave again, or whatever, I don't know what wave it is, to show RPM. So the other thing is, you want to make sure you have fire. So air, fuel, and fire is what's going to make it run, and it also has to be at the right time. So you want to make sure your firing order is correct, and it has a drop down in there for that, and go through your on the Holly, you want to go through there and make sure you have all your correct sensors in there correctly, and if they need offset values or whatever, it's GIGO, garbage in, garbage out. If you don't have the right stuff in the software, then it's not going to work. So you have to make sure they match. So make sure you have fire. Make sure you hear the fuel pump turn on. Make sure the pressure is correct, and then you're going to have the air, unless you. I have seen people do like blowers and stuff and leave the plastics on, and it couldn't get air in there. But I mean, it can happen. So I put paper towel or shop rags in each of the cylinders when the engine's apart, and then when I pull them out to put the intake on, I take a flashlight and I look down into each and every port and make sure that there's nothing in there. That's always a check I do because of a hard life lesson I learned. So I always check the intake runners to make sure there's nothing in there, and then blow out the intake manifold and whatnot. So, and then, like I say, when you're turning it over, it's good to do a system log in the Holly, or a data log in HP tuners or whatever, so you can watch your sensors and make sure that they're doing what they need to be doing. So when it takes a lot of thought and everything to put it together, and then you're mentally exhausted from putting it all together, and then when you go to crank it and it doesn't crank up, then it just it's like you hit a wall, and then you're like, everything's running through your head, and you're trying to figure out what can it be why is it not running. So if you've got the system log or data log, then like I say, just look at all your values and make sure that it's showing RPM, that it's showing the right fuel pressure and stuff like that. So anyway, that was I just encountered it just now and figured it'd be a good video to show going through how to just check it over, make sure to figure out what it's missing to make it run.